Approximately 20 years ago, 1995-ish, my childhood was perfect, or as close as you can get. To be honest, I was spoiled rotten as a rugrat. It was summertime, and my parents decided to take my brother and I to the park, along with our neighbor and his 2 kids, Eric and Misty. We were all pretty close. While attending the park, my brother and Eric were scheming together, searching for a proper way to have our parents say yes for our neighbors to spend the night. It was a success. At this point in time, everything is silky smooth. Both Eric and Misty said that they will come over to our house when we all got home, and after that, they'll get their toothbrushes and their pajamas. My mom told them, just come on in, you don't have to knock. They both said okay. Once we got home, my father got a phone call from a close friend who asked if he would like to have coffee with him. My father said yes, and he left. So as he's gone, it was just me, my older brother, and our mom. We were all sitting in the living room watching a magic program on television. Moments later, we hear a subtle, friendly knock on our front door. My mother, assuming it was Eric and Misty, said, come on in. Nothing happened. Once again, my mother said it louder. Come in, thinking that she didn't say the words loud enough the first time around. Still nothing. All 3 of us are starting to get rightfully confused and a little paranoid. And for the 3rd time, my mother attempts to utter, come on in. Again, Eric and Misty never emerged through the front door. Suddenly, another knock on the door takes place. Out of annoyance, my mother decided to hastily walk to the door and see what was happening. Being a little child and very curious as well, I tagged along. What's the worst that can happen? We found out. Almost. As my mother opens the main door, we both saw a man on our porch. This person was dressed in a black ski mask, a camo jacket, cargo pants, and black military-style boots. Adding to his getup was a handgun that was pointing directly at my mother's face. In his pocket there was a rope, as well as a knife in a holster. Panicking, my mother instinctively pushed me aside to where I wasn't visible, trying to protect me. My older brother was on the couch in a fetal position, with blankets covering him, also in complete and utter shock. The next thing we know, this degenerate got startled and took off running like Usain Bolt and jumping our chain link fence without any hesitation. The stranger makes a left, which leads to the back door and the other houses. My mom hurries to the other door to see if it's locked and looks out the window that's structured inside of it, and she saw him sprinting through various yards of our neighbors in order to escape. That, well, was that. Very soon afterwards, my mother called the police, who dispatched a few cops to our residence. She then browsed through the phone book for the number to the restaurant that my dad was attending. He quickly got home, even before the police. The local cops took our statement and assured us that we would be okay, and they are going to routinely drive through the neighborhood to be on guard. 20 years later, we still don't have any answers on who that person was, and better yet, why. What's weird is that the neighbor and his kids moved just a few months later, and I never heard from them again. A part of me thinks that the father of the kids was involved, but there wasn't anything definitive to prove that. Overall, it was just a very strange night that I will never forget. I grew up as an only child in a small house in the Hollywood Hills. Before housing prices in the neighborhood skyrocketed, my parents were not the helicoptering type. Perhaps because they themselves grew up in a small, safe town in the Midwest back in the 1950s, 1960s. I spent my childhood roaming the neighborhood and the hills, playing imaginary little stories through my head. I had a couple of local friends over the years, but generally, there were no kids in our neighborhood. It wasn't the place to raise children. It wasn't a great part of Hollywood at the time, and the 101 freeway was quite literally in our backyard. Most of the streets were unpaved, and there were no sidewalks. Mostly, it was populated with aging hippie types and struggling actors. So 90% of the time, I played and I wandered all alone. One day, my mother picked me up from school and we headed home. Once through the door, we did the usual, kicked our shoes off, shouldered off school and work bags, greeted the cats, and attended to the blinking red light on the answering machine. I think I so vividly remember our usual little routine that day because what cut through it next was so unusual and unsettling. and rang in such sharp contrast to the comfortable little world I've always felt so safe within. I was maybe 8 or 9 at the time, and this was definitely a moment of innocence lost. There was only one message on the machine. A man's voice, grinning, invaded the little house. The man said, "I would love so much to scare your daughter." Then he laughed, maniacal sounding and exaggerated. It would have sounded like the guffaw of a villain in some movie, but it didn't. Despite the obvious theatrics, it didn't sound that way, because it was real. It was far scarier than any fiction. The laughter was loud, long, and drawn out. I didn't even hear the end of it. My mom hit the stop on the player, cutting him off abruptly, but his presence still hung heavily in the air. My little world had been irrevocably disturbed. I remember my mother playing it off very casually and telling me that it was nothing and that I shouldn't be afraid. And I recall how shocking her composure was. How was that nothing? Shouldn't I be afraid? Why wasn't she afraid? Looking back now, I realized she was putting up a front for my benefit. Whenever I brought this up to her as an adult, she seems to sort of vaguely remember it and goes, "Oh yeah, I don't know what that was. Just someone playing a prank." I'm shocked, honestly, that my parents didn't go to the police with it. That's not what I would consider a prank. To this day, I think my mom is still trying to downplay it. She grows uncomfortable when I try to bring it up. Anyway, after that incident, I could never really fully enjoy myself when I was out in the neighborhood by myself. I always wondered if that man was somewhere in the hills watching. I have read many of these Let's Not Meet stories on Reddit, and I have always been lucky that I did not need to write my own until now. My wife and I welcomed our son Lucas, not his real name of course, 6 months ago. It's been a learning curve, and this having babies thing is not for the birds. But things are finally start to go smoothly. He's finally sleeping through the night, and that nasty colic he had is gone. I'm very lucky that I get to work from home. Even luckier, my wife owns her own business. She's a photographer. She's home whenever she's not out shooting a wedding or at her studio. Most mornings we take a 6.5-mile walk, and Lucas is strapped into his baby carrier, and we take off. We usually make it around halfway before we need to stop to give the little man a bottle, so he will pass out and let us finish the walk in peace. So like usual, we're about halfway done with our walk, and the baby starts cranking up for a massive squall. We normally stop at either a park or this nice fountain area with a coffee shop and a grocery store attached. We both wanted coffee in the worst way, so while I sat with the baby, my wife went into the coffee shop for our caffeine. I'm slowly rocking Lucas as I feed him when I hear someone sit on the bench next to me. I can smell her before I see her, a heavy cloying perfume. She's dolled up to the nines. An older woman, between her late 30s to 40s. She has that hard look that makes her look older than she probably is. "What kind of baby is that?" she inquires in a heavy Russian accent. I have a propensity for being a smartass, so I reply, "A baby. No, not that kind. Boy, girl," she asks as she starts smoothing out the romper we have on the baby. "He's a boy, 6 months old," I add, a little freaked out at this perfect stranger touching my kid. "Looks healthy. How much he weigh?" She tries to pull the baby to get her a good look at him. Now I'm hoping that my wife will come out any second, but of course she's in line waiting for our cappuccinos. I think 18 pounds. He was 9 pounds at birth. I ramble on, hoping she will just go away. Lucas is drifting off to sleep when she leans over and just snatches him out of my arms. Let me see, big boy. Big frame like Papa. He will be big boy, no? Now I'm pissed. I ask her for him back. While I glance in the coffee shop, my wife is at the counter at this point. "Hand him over now," I ask firmly. Not to mention he is now awake, and he is totally in that stranger danger stage, so he was pissed too. She reluctantly hands him over. I try to begin to calm him down, so at first I do not hear what she asks. "How much for baby?" I hear her the second time. "He's not for sale." I'm incredulous, and thankfully I see my wife get our drinks and grab the napkins and creamer. "How much you want?" "I pay high price for baby." She starts touching him again, so I yank him backwards. my wife finally comes out and sees the lady touching our kid. My wife is a total mama bear, so she gives the lady dagger eyes. So she gets up, looks at me, and says, "You think about it, duh." Then she walks away. I tell my wife everything, and of course she's as freaked out as I am. Luckily it's been a week and a half and we have yet to run into her again. So, crazy Russian lady who wanted to buy my kid, let's never meet again. Edit. Just to clear some things up, we live in Canada, and there are a lot of Russian tourists that come through this part of Canada. We did alert the authorities, and no one had reported a woman asking to buy babies. However, today, we found out that the supermarket this takes place at, well, technically outside the market, that this woman was in the store last night and has made a few families feel uncomfortable, following them around, touching the kids. Cops were called, but they let her off with a warning, and she was kicked out of the store. Police are now aware of her, but unfortunately, unless she takes a baby or hurts someone, they can't do diddly squat to her. We still haven't run into her, supposedly according to the staff at the store she lives in nearby. So let's hope we don't run into her again. I won't ever hit a woman, as was suggested to me by a few of the readers. But my wife will not hesitate to knock a bitch out, and trust me, my wife is scary when she's angry.